Hi everyone, my name is Muhammad Ikram. On today's topic is about floods in the scope of disaster management. I would like to discuss further with you about floods in the scope of disaster management. As an introduction, a flood is usually caused by rain, heavy thunderstorms, and thawing of snow. It is considered to be a temporary condition of 2 or more acres of dry land either overflowed with inland or tidal waters, rapid or runoff of surface waters, and even mud flows. Floods are natural phenomena which are known as water-related disaster. As we know, floods is also one of the natural hazards that most of the country are facing right now. A flood occurs when the geomorphic equilibrium in the river system is disturbed because of intrinsic or extrinsic factors, or when a system crosses the geomorphic threshold. Flooding in a river due to aggradation of riverbed is considered as intrinsic threshold. Meanwhile, flooding in a river due to a heavy rainfall is considered as extrinsic threshold. There are several types of floods, such flash floods, river floods, coastal floods, and urban floods. According to their duration, flood can be divided into several different categories. First, we have the slow onset floods, which usually last for a relatively longer period. It may last for 1 or more weeks or even months. Second, we have a rapid onset floods, which usually last for a relatively shorter period. They usually last for 1 or 2 days. And last, we have a flash floods, which may occur within minutes or a few hours after a heavy rainfall, tropical storm, failure of dams or levees, or releases of ice dams, and it causes the greatest damage to the society. Also, the causes of floods can be divided into natural factors and man-made factors. Such causes are silting of the riverbed, inadequate capacity within the banks, riverbank erosion, flow obstruction, poor natural drainage, cyclones, retardation of flow and backwater effect, and such a heavy rainfall. Here are more causes of flooding, such geology, relief, vegetation, the catchment shape and catchment size, the land use and drainage. Few more factors such vegetation cover, rock type, lakes and reservoirs, soil type and depth, land use, rainfall intensity and duration, slopes and climates, which all leads to flooding. These are impacts of floods, which may lead to human loss, property loss, affects the major roads, disruption of air, train, bus services, spread of waterborne communicable disease, communication breakdown, electricity supply cut off, economic and social disruption, and even increase in air and water pollution. A number of criteria determine the dangers of a flood. First, we have the velocity. High velocities of flow create erosive forces and can do things like destroy the foundations. Second, we have the depth of water. It is about the flotation, failures of foundation, and vegetation survival. Third, we have the rate of rise. It is where the rate at which the water level increases. And fourth, we have a seasonal, the land during the growing season, the effects on agricultural production, and other things like that. Flood equipment protection. There are several. This is a door flood barrier. It is used to fit and seal your door. Second, this is a freestanding door barrier. The difference with this one is you can still have used the door as well. And the third one is the modular flood barrier. It's the highest level of protection. It is installed to protect your whole property from high bodies of water during a flood. The measures. First, we look into structural measures of flood. It is about the embankments, dams and reservoirs, natural detention, channel improvement, drainage improvement, and also the diversion of flood waters. What about the non-structural measures? We have the floodplain zoning and flood proofing, flood preparedness and community level awareness, flood forecasting and early warning system, afforestation, public relief, and also flood insurance. Flood management approach. Floods cannot be absolutely controlled, but floods can only be managed to reduce the flood losses. How and why? It is increased vulnerability causes that lead to flooding. First, it is indiscriminate encroachment. Second, increasing economic and developmental activities in floodplains. Third, the lack of regulations itself. Fourth, inadequate drainage system. Fifth, the inadequate maintenance. And lastly is a lack of disaster preparedness. What about the idea of flood management strategies about to modify the floods, modify the susceptibility to flood damage, modify loss burden, and bear the loss? Attempts to modify the floods involve flood protection by physical measures such as constructions of embankments, constructions of detention reservoirs, channel improvements. Attempts to modify the susceptibility to flood damage involve action designed to reduce the vulnerability of property and other developmental activities in the floodplains to the flood hazard. Attempts to modify the loss burden consist of actions to modify the incidence of losses by spreading them over a large segment of community. And lastly is about bearing the loss. Bearing the loss means living with the floods. On the second thought, we might think all these strategies should be implemented by the government. But to be true, it is not easy as what we see. This is an example of floodplain zoning. It is divided into three colors which tell about a frequent flood normal channel, flood occurs in 25 years, and flood occurs in 100 years. Also, this color coding would tell about the level it is being prohibitive, restrictive, or warning level. The flood management activities consists of pre-flood, during flood, and post-flood activities. These are the cycles of disaster management. As we know, it starts from mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. These are the actions to be taken. Before the disaster, what can you do? Learn warning signs and community alert system. Have disaster supplies on hand. Develop an emergency communication plan in case of separation. What about during the disaster? What can you do during a flood watch? If indoors, turn on battery-operated radio to get latest emergency information. Get pre-assembled emergency supplies. What if outdoors? Climb to high ground and stay there. Avoid walking through any flood waters. And what about during an evacuation? If advised to evacuate, do so immediately to avoid flooded roads, being sure to follow recommended evacuation routes and listen to radio for evacuation instructions. What about after disaster? Don't return home until authorities express it is safe to do so. Help neighbors who may need assistance. Watch out for animals, especially poisonous snakes that may have come into your home with flood waters. Look for fire hazards. Throw away all foods, including canned, that has come in contact with flood waters. Recovery phase. It is the final phase of disaster management cycle. It is the longest phase out of all until system return to normalcy or nearly to normalcy. There are two types of recovery phase which are long-term and short-term. Long-term, it is emphasized to complete the redevelopment of damage, and short-term is emphasized on the restoration of vital services like water supply, social infrastructure to minimum standards of operation and safety. These are the basic flood preparedness measures. We have planning, a disaster preparedness plan that sets out the sequence of activities and responsibilities of response personnel must be developed. Second is warning. Warning and evacuation procedures in vulnerable areas must be developed. Third, we have a medical. Train personnel in first aid and trauma care and stock necessary medical supplies. Fourth, we have the communication. Systems and message must be developed to inform the public of health, safety, and security matters. And lastly, it's about essential services. It is about the hospital, government buildings, communication systems must be cited for continued operation during an emergency. These are the typical post-disaster activities by the local authorities in terms of evaluation, search and rescue, medical assistance, disaster assessment, short-term food and water provision, water purification, epidemiological surveillance, temporary lodging provision, and blankets if needed. What about their secondary response by the local authorities? They can repair or reconstruct infrastructure, housing, and public buildings. It is about create jobs and assist recovery of agriculture. What about the foreign agencies? They can give credit, create jobs, repair and reconstruct the housing, provide technical assistance, and also assist recovery of agriculture, small businesses, and institutions. So how do we help the flood victims? By water supply, duties of medical teams, shelter management, duties of civil supplies, police department, and also irrigation department. To conclude on this topic, we must remember that flood is not only a reoccurring natural disaster, it is very costly and life-threatening events. Floods are not subject to complete control, but their damaging effects can be mitigated. Also, all levels of governments should persuasively support the designation of flood-prone areas for open space uses. Also, last but not least, policymakers must extend their thinking about the impacts of private entities beyond the local, the near-term, the likely, and the recently newsworthy. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like it. Happy learning. Bye.